Life on the edge of a blade, the absolute power of the Roman father. Rome, 200 BC, the most powerful city on earth, a civilization that gave the world roads, law, and architecture that still stands today. But inside the walls of Roman homes, inside the very families that built this empire, there was a law so extreme, so absolute, that it sounds impossible to modern ears. A Roman father held the legal power of life and death over every person in his household, his sons, his daughters, even his adult children, forever, until the day he died. This law had a name, Patria Potestas, and what it allowed a father to do to his own child, according to documented Roman legal records, will change how you see the ancient world entirely. To walk into ancient Rome is to walk into a world built on law, not just on legions and conquest, though Rome had plenty of both. Rome's real foundation, the thing that separated it from every other civilization of its time, was its obsession with legal structure, with written rules, with codified authority. The Romans believed that law was what made a man civilized. Law was what separated Rome from the barbarians beyond the borders. And yet, inside that legal system, buried in its deepest foundations, was a concept that modern legal scholars still find difficult to fully process. According to the historical and legal records of ancient Rome, the Patria Potestas, which translates literally as the power of the father, was one of the oldest and most fundamental institutions in all of Roman law. It predated the Republic. It predated most of the formal legal structures that historians associate with Roman civilization. And, according to Roman legal tradition, it gave the father of a household, the pater familias, an authority over his children that was essentially unlimited. We are not talking about discipline. We are not talking about the kind of parental authority that exists in most modern societies. We are talking about a legal status that classified adult Roman sons, men who had fought in wars, who held public office, who commanded armies, as juridically equivalent to property. Their father could control their finances. He could veto their marriages. He could order them to work. And, according to the 12 Tables, the foundational legal code of Rome, inscribed around 450 BC and documented extensively by Roman historians, including Cicero, he held, at least in theory, the power of life and death over them. The 12 Tables. 12 bronze tablets, displayed publicly in the Roman Forum so that every citizen could read the law. On those tablets, the power of the pater familias was written without apology, without qualification, as a simple, self-evident fact of Roman life. To understand how this was possible, you have to understand what Rome valued above everything else. Not individual freedom. That was a Greek concept. Rome valued the family unit, the gens, the bloodline, the continuity of name, property, and religious duty across generations. The paterfamilias was not just a father. He was the priest of the household gods, the legal representative of every person under his roof, and the single point of authority through which an entire family connected to Roman society. Without him, legally speaking, his family did not fully exist. Marcus is a farmer. He lives outside Rome on a small plot of land that has been in his family for 4 generations. He has olive trees, a vegetable garden, and a son named Lucius who is 17 years old. Marcus is not a cruel man. He is not a villain. He is simply a man caught in circumstances that are closing in around him like walls. The year is approximately 200 BC. Rome has just finished the Second Punic War against Carthage, a war that lasted 17 years and consumed extraordinary resources. The Roman treasury is strained. The economy is reshaping itself in ways that destroy small farmers and enrich large landowners. Marcus has borrowed money. He borrowed it to survive a bad harvest 3 years ago, and now the interest has compounded to a point where the debt is larger than his entire farm is worth. In modern times, Marcus would declare bankruptcy. He would negotiate. He would have legal protections. But this is Rome. And Rome, according to the legal records preserved in the writings of historians like Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, had a system called mancipium. Mancipium was the legal mechanism by which one person could be transferred into the authority of another, not as a slave in the permanent sense, but as something disturbingly close. A person under mancipium owed their labour, their obedience, and their physical presence to whoever held the contract. The term itself comes from the Latin manus, hand, and capio, to take by the hand. A physical, legally formalized transfer of a human being as though they were livestock or furniture. The law allowed a Roman father, acting under his Patria Potestas, to transfer his son into the mancipium of a creditor, to hand his child over in satisfaction of a debt. The son would work, the son would serve, until the debt was cleared. Then, legally, he would return to his father's household, his status as a free Roman citizen technically intact. But the experience of having been handed over, of having been treated as a transferable asset, left marks that no legal document could erase. Marcus stands before the praetor, the Roman judicial magistrate. He speaks the required legal formula. He places his hand on his son's shoulder, and Lucius, who has not been asked, who has no legal standing to object, becomes the property of another man's household, until the numbers balance. Lucius has never worked for anyone except his father. He has never slept in a house that was not his family's house. Now he rises before dawn in a stranger's estate, works the vineyard through the burning afternoon, and eats whatever the household decides to give him. But here is what separates Lucius's situation from outright slavery. And the distinction is one that Roman law took extremely seriously, according to legal scholars who have studied the texts of Roman jurists, including Gaius and Ulpian. Lucius is not a slave. He retains his legal identity as a Roman citizen. He cannot be permanently bought and sold in the slave markets. He cannot be branded. In theory, though enforcement was inconsistent, he cannot be subjected to certain categories of physical punishment reserved for slaves. His situation has a specific Latin description. He is somewhere in a legal grey space that Roman jurists themselves struggle to define cleanly. He is neither fully free nor fully enslaved. He is a Roman citizen who has been temporarily transferred. And that distinction, fragile as it is the thread he holds on to through the months of field work and the long, exhausted nights. What does Lucius think about during those nights? We cannot know specifically. These are composite figures, drawn from the patterns documented in Roman historical and legal records. But the Roman writers who commented on this practice, and several did, with varying degrees of discomfort, noted the psychological devastation it caused. The Roman orator Cicero, writing centuries later about the nature of Roman family law, acknowledged that the theoretical powers granted to fathers under the 12 Tables were extraordinary, even by the standards of Roman society. Most fathers, he noted, did not use them. But the law made no distinction between the father who never would and the father who did. After a period of service, the length determined by the original debt agreement, the contract is fulfilled. The debt is cleared, or reduced enough to satisfy the creditor, and Lucius walks back up the road to his father's farm. A legal ceremony called emancipatio formally returns him to his father's potestas. He is a son again. The olive trees look the same. The house looks the same. But nothing between Lucius and Marcus will ever be exactly the same again. The return is not a celebration. It is a legal transaction, performed before witnesses, documented with the same cold precision as the original transfer. Lucius stands in his father's house again, under his father's authority again, back at the beginning. Except the world has shifted. The Punic Wars have reorganized the Mediterranean economy. Roman legions returning from overseas campaigns bring slaves, tens of thousands of them, captured in Carthage, in Greece, in Spain. These slaves flood into the agricultural economy and undercut the labour value of free farmers like Marcus. Small plots like his are being absorbed by the wealthy senatorial class, who can afford to run vast estates using slave labour at almost no cost. The economic pressure that drove Marcus to his first desperate decision has not eased. If anything, it has worsened. And Marcus has made another miscalculation. Not maliciously. The Roman historians who documented similar cases across this period consistently describe these situations as structural rather than personal. Fathers who sold sons were rarely monsters. They were usually men trapped in an economic system that gave them one specific legal tool and almost no others. But here is the reality that confronts Lucius. His father still holds Patria Potestas over him. He is still, in the eyes of Roman law, a person without independent legal standing. He cannot own property in his own name. Anything he earns belongs legally to his father's household. He cannot enter contracts without his father's authority. He cannot make decisions about his own life, including whether to marry, whether to serve in the army, whether to leave the farm, without Marcus's consent. And then the numbers turn against Marcus again. A drought, a failed harvest, the same creditor, and the same terrible arithmetic. Roman law, under the 12 Tables, explicitly permitted a father to sell his son into mancipium a second time. The same process, the same legal formula, the same handover before the praetor. The law saw no problem with this. The law had no word for what Lucius was experiencing, no category for the specific damage being done, only the clean, formal language of transfer and transaction. The second time is different, not because the physical conditions are necessarily worse, though they may be depending on the new household. The second time is different because Lucius now knows exactly what is happening. The first time there was shock, there was disbelief, there was the possibility that this was an aberration, a single terrible event that would not repeat. The second time there is no such protection. The world has revealed itself clearly, and what it has revealed is this. In the legal framework of Rome, in the civilization that considers itself the pinnacle of human organization, Lucius is a transferable unit. He can be moved. He can be handed over. He can be used. And then he can be handed back, and the process can begin again, as many times as the mathematics requires. The new household is in a different city. Lucius works in conditions that vary depending on whatever records and archaeological evidence from this period suggest about the daily reality of Mancippium labourers, which was, consistently, exhausting, socially marginal, and psychologically isolating. He is around slaves who have no legal citizenship at all, and the comparison is uncomfortable in both directions. He has more legal rights than they do. He experiences almost none of them. The question of physical punishment was one that Roman jurists actually debated. According to the legal texts, the specific protections against corporal punishment that applied to citizens in criminal proceedings did not necessarily extend cleanly to someone under Mancippium. The master of the household held authority over the person, and the boundaries of that authority were, in practice, enforced imperfectly. Roman law was sophisticated, but its enforcement depended heavily on the social standing of the person claiming protection. But Lucius survives. He is careful. He is methodical, and somewhere in the long months of the second contract, he begins to understand something about the legal structure of his situation. Something that is written in the 12 tables, right alongside the provisions that allowed his father to sell him. A way out. Inscribed in bronze, in the Forum, visible to every Roman citizen who could read, the provision is written in Latin with the precise, unambiguous language that Roman law preferred. According to the 12 tables, as documented by multiple Roman legal and historical sources, including Cicero in his work De Republica, the exact text reads, Si pater filium ter venum duit, filius a patre liber esto. If a father sells his son 3 times, the son shall be free from the father. Read that again. If a father sells his son, a Roman citizen, his own child, 3 times into Mancippium, then after the 3rd sale, the son is legally released from his father's Patria Potestas permanently. He becomes sui juris, his own legal person, no longer subject to his father's authority in any domain of life. Why 3? Roman legal historians have debated this for centuries. The number 3 carried enormous symbolic weight in Roman religious and legal culture. It appeared repeatedly in ritual, in contract law, in ceremonial procedure. 3 repetitions of an action created permanence. 3 strikes of the same offense changed the legal category entirely. But the more practical explanation, supported by the writings of Roman jurists, is that 3 sales represented a pattern of behavior. A father who had demonstrated repeatedly and publicly that he was willing to treat his son as a commercial asset rather than a familial dependent. After 3 times, Roman society's patience with that father was exhausted. After 3 times, the law intervened on the son's behalf. The social consequences for a father who sold his son 3 times were severe. Roman reputation, dignitas, was not a soft concept. It was the foundation of political participation, of business relationships, of everything. A man known to have sold his son 3 times was marked. He would face exclusion, mockery, and formal social sanctions from his community. The law gave him the right to sell twice, but the law also ensured that the 3rd sale destroyed him socially, even as it freed his son legally. And here, in the 3rd book of the 12 Tables, Lucius finds his map. The 3rd sale is not an accident. By this point in the story, based on the patterns documented in Roman legal case studies and the writings of historians who analysed how mancipium provisions were used and occasionally manipulated in practice, Lucius understands the mechanism available to him. He returns from the 2nd contract. He is back under his father's roof, under his father's legal authority. But something has shifted in the relationship, and Marcus, who is not a stupid man, can sense it. The son who left in despair has returned with something different in his posture, something that looks uncomfortably like patience. The confrontation between Marcus and Lucius, and in real Roman families, according to the historical record, these confrontations did occur, would not have been theatrical. Roman men of this class were not given to dramatic speeches. The conflict would have been quiet, precise. 2 people who understand the legal terrain they are both standing on, moving carefully toward an inevitable outcome. Marcus's finances have not improved. The 3rd crisis arrives with the same structural inevitability as the first 2. And when Marcus once again approaches the praetor with his son, the legal officer of Rome is aware that this is the 3rd transfer. The record exists. Rome kept records. The 3rd sale proceeds with a formality that carries entirely different weight from the previous 2. The legal formula is spoken. The transfer is made. Lucius enters his 3rd mancipium contract. He works. He fulfills the terms. And when the contract concludes and the formalities of return are initiated, the law intervenes. Because according to the 12 Tables, emancipatio after the 3rd sale does not return Lucius to his father. It releases him from his father entirely. The praetor presides over a ceremony that is, legally speaking, the death of the relationship between Marcus and Lucius as Roman law defines it. Marcus loses Patria Potestas permanently. He loses legal authority over his son. He loses the inheritance rights that flow through that authority. And in the eyes of Roman society, he has demonstrated publicly and irreversibly that he is a man who treated his child as merchandise 3 separate times. Lucius walks out of the praetor's court as sui juris, his own man. For the first time in his life, sui juris. The phrase itself is worth sitting with for a moment, because it encapsulates something that the Romans considered foundational to adult human dignity. Sui, of one's own. Juris, of law, of right. A person who is sui juris is, in the legal language of Rome, a person who answers to no one above them in civil law. They can own property. They can enter contracts. They can bring legal actions in their own name. They can make decisions about their own life without requiring the consent of a supervising legal authority. For most Roman men, this status arrived the moment their father died. The death of the pater familias automatically released all his sons from Patria Potestas. This was the normal path, the expected path. Sons waited, sometimes into their 40s and 50s, for the death of an aged father to grant them the legal independence that the culture simultaneously demanded of men in public life and denied them in private law. Lucius has achieved this without waiting. He is young, and he is free in a way that Roman law rarely granted to a man whose father still lived. But freedom, as documented in the Roman historical record, came with costs that the law did not acknowledge. Lucius has lost his claim to his father's estate. The inheritance that would have been his, the farm, whatever remained of it, the household gods, the family name in its formal legal sense, is severed. He is free and simultaneously dispossessed. What does a young Roman man do with his freedom when he has no property and no family support structure? The Roman historical record gives us clear answers. Military service was the most common path. The legions accepted men without property, paid wages, offered the possibility of advancement, and could transform a man without social standing into a decorated veteran with land grants and political connections. Some took positions in trade, in the growing commercial networks of the Republic. Some found patrons, wealthy Romans who offered support in exchange for political and social loyalty, a system called clientela, that was entirely formalized and socially accepted. The psychological wounds, however, are not addressed in any Roman legal text. The Romans did not have a concept for what we would recognize as trauma in this context. They had concepts of honor and shame, of dignity lost and dignity regained. But the specific experience of having been transferred as a legal object by your own father 3 times, that was not something Roman philosophy had developed language for. Lucius rebuilds, because that is what humans do. The question that modern historians and legal scholars return to repeatedly when examining Patria Potestas is this: how did a civilization as sophisticated as Rome maintain this system for so long? The Roman Republic lasted roughly 5 centuries. The empire that followed it lasted several centuries more. And throughout most of that span, Patria Potestas remained a foundational element of Roman family law. The answer lies partly in comparison. Roman law as analysed by scholars including Barry Nicholas in his foundational work on Roman private law, was actually more restrictive of paternal power than some contemporary systems. Greek law, in certain city-states, gave fathers even broader authority over newborns, including the formal right of exposure, leaving unwanted infants to die, which was also practiced in Rome, but with less formalization. Egyptian law of the Ptolemaic period handled family authority through different mechanisms, but with similar functional outcomes for women and children. What distinguished Rome was the codification. The fact that these powers were written down, publicly displayed, and formally adjudicated created a system that was brutal in its provisions, but also, paradoxically, more constrained than informal systems. Because the law was written, it could also be read, and read by people like Lucius, who were looking for the provisions that protected them as much as the provisions that controlled them. The role of mothers in this system is one that the historical record handles with uncomfortable clarity. Roman women, including the mothers of sons subject to mancipium, had essentially no legal standing to intervene. The mother was not, in Roman law, the legal guardian of her children. The father was, absolutely and exclusively. A mother, watching her son being transferred into mancipium, had no legal mechanism to object. Her only tools were social pressure, persuasion, and whatever informal authority she held within her marriage. As the Republic gave way to the Empire, and as Rome absorbed Greek philosophical influences through the Stoic tradition, the absolute nature of Patria Potestas began to soften, slowly, incrementally, through imperial legislation rather than wholesale reform. The Emperor Augustus restricted the application of capital punishment within families. Later emperors further limited what fathers could legally do to children. By the time of the Christian Empire under Constantine, the sale of children into mancipium had been substantially curtailed. The story of Lucius and Marcus ends, as most human stories do, not with a single dramatic moment, but with the accumulation of smaller ones. Lucius builds a life. Marcus grows old. The farm either survives or it doesn't. The legal rupture between them is permanent, but the human relationship continues in whatever form two people can manage after everything they have done to each other, and everything that has been done to them by the structure they lived inside. This is what history looks like up close. Not empires and monuments. Two people in a farmhouse near Rome, navigating a legal system that was the product of centuries of human decisions, trying to survive inside it. The Patria Potestas was formally abolished, in its most extreme provisions, through a series of legal changes that accumulated through the late Roman Empire, and were codified in the Corpus Juris Civilis, the great legal compilation ordered by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century AD. That document became the foundation of what legal scholars today call civil law, the legal tradition that governs most of continental Europe, Latin America, and large parts of Asia and Africa. French law, German law, Spanish law, Italian law, all of them trace a direct lineage to Roman legal thinking. The influence is not just historical. When modern European civil law discusses parental authority, property rights, the legal status of family members, and the relationship between the individual and the family unit, it is working with concepts that Roman jurists first articulated, argued over, and wrote down in the centuries surrounding the lives of people like Marcus and Lucius. The concept of children's rights, the idea that a child is a legal person with independent protections, not simply a family asset subject to parental authority, developed in direct reaction to systems like Patria Potestas. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, adopted in 1989, can be read as the culmination of a very long argument that began in the Roman Forum, inscribed on bronze tablets that a farmer's son once studied carefully, looking for the provision that would set him free. The ancient world was not a simple place. It was not uniformly barbaric. It was not uniformly civilized. It was a world of enormous sophistication, existing alongside enormous cruelty, often written into the same legal document. The 12 Tables gave Rome its structure and gave Lucius his path to freedom. The same text, the same law. History does not offer clean conclusions. It offers this. The people who lived inside these systems were as fully human as we are. They loved and suffered and adapted and survived. And the systems they built, for better and for worse, are still shaping the world we live in today. That is why the past is never as distant as it seems.